Welcome to Women Making News Live. I'm Debbie Hicks, and our special guest today is Justine Bautista, a graduate researcher with the University of California, Irvine. Justine, welcome to Women Making News.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, yes, we're so glad to have you, and I just can't wait to jump in and learn more about your interests because I think they are so relevant today. So, Justine, tell us a bit about yourself, and then let's move into your research interests.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Justine. I was born and raised in Orange County, California. I've been here my whole life. I'm still here. I go to school at the University of California, Irvine, like you mentioned. I went to school as well for my undergrad at Chapman University, which was in Orange, California. And I studied psychology and integrated educational studies. Um, and through that I basically became really interested in research and in psychology, particularly looking at mental health and technology's impacts on mental health. And so that's kind of where my research interest came in. I'm also a Filipino American, and I think that I hold that really closely with me as I continue to do my research. It's a very integral part of my identity and has informed a lot of my interests as well in diversity and in thinking about how we can kind of impact Asian mental health through the work that I'm doing. So, yeah.
Okay, so there was a lot that you just shared there, and let me see which one I want to pick out to get you to go further on. Um, at what age did you decide that you wanted to continue your academic studies and pursue a PhD?
Right. So I actually knew probably my second year of undergrad. I knew pretty early on that I wanted to continue to do research and work in academia. At first, it was mainly a teaching interest. So I wanted to be a professor because I had seen other professors that had inspired me at that time and really just kind of made me feel like I was compelled to teach students and mentor in that capacity. And then when I got to learn more about my mentors and the work that they were doing, I started to become really interested in their research. And it kind of allowed me to really think about mentorship in other ways. I still am really interested in potentially teaching, um, but I think that there are ways that I've been really interested in kind of uplifting other folks to also do research. And I think that doing research in community settings has been really important to me as well. And so, yeah, I think that that's kind of where it stemmed from. And I knew that I wanted to do research relatively early on. I think I was around like 19 or 20. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's good. So you got your undergraduate in psychology,
Mhm.
and teaching was something that you were thinking about, and mentoring became very paramount in your own life, but sounds like it's still important to you, the mentoring going both ways. So you are a mentor?
Um, I think that I am a mentor that still has mentors. I still need mentorship myself, but I do think that um, through my work as a graduate student, I've found it really beneficial to be able to interact with folks that are interested in getting into research, or even people that are just interested in continuing in higher education. I've found it really meaningful. I just got off of a call with one student who's interested in taking the LSAT, which is completely beyond me. I'm not a law student in any capacity, but I feel like I've always been willing to talk about my own experiences and thinking about ways that they can kind of help encourage people to pursue higher education, especially folks from backgrounds that may not traditionally have those opportunities. And so that's what I've also been doing.
Right.
And then I also work with a couple of community organizations as well. And being in those spaces has been really helpful. And just, yeah, thinking about how my work can also be really impactful on a personal level and kind of how I can form those types of connections with people.
And so, when did you first discover that you had an interest in psychology? That's what you studied in your undergrad, but you also mentioned mental health and you also mentioned
Mhm.
technology. And so, when did you first uh, uh, recognize that you wanted to pursue further and your interests in mental health?
Yeah, so I've always had an interest in mental health since I was in high school. I think that mental health also is something that I see affecting a lot of people on different levels. Because, yes, like 1 in 5 people are affected by mental health issues, but 5 out of 5 people have mental health. So it really is that everyone is impacted by mental health in some way. And so I think that on a personal level, that was always something that was interesting to me. And then I took an AP psychology class, I remember, in my undergrad. And I remember it being an eye opener of like, mental health isn't just something that's like a buzzword, it has all of this research behind it. And there's a lot of methods and tools that we can actually cultivate to be able to help us. And so that's when I started thinking about how to kind of operationalize mental health by thinking through potential solutions. So I got into technology research because I was honestly just thinking about how the modern Gen Z students at the time were using tools creatively to kind of impact or kind of help their own personal mental health. And I thought on like a really personal level that like a lot of folks are talking to each other through text. Their social media is impacting their mental health as well. They spend a lot of times on their phones. So it was just kind of this personal thought of like, um, most of the time Gen Z is spending time on their smartphones to kind of think through mental health issues. Like they even like are Googling things. And so what does that do and how are they using it? And then I ended up working on a study. I worked with a professor and was her research assistant. And I was working on a study that had to do with social media and thinking about like social media and how it's mobilized, like the be your own boss phenomenon of like quitting the 9 to 5 and like empowering yourself to do to start up your own business and stuff, which is something that isn't directly in my research interest, but really opened up the idea of like, what is social media doing? Like, what is technology doing? Um, and then it just kind of was something that sort of like branched out into other things where like now I also think about like mental health apps and how people are using mental health apps now since that's been the latest thing. And I think that being a part of technology research is so interesting because it changes as new tools come out. And so at first it was social media, and then now I'm thinking about mental health apps. And so as you have conversations with Gen Z folks, you get new ideas and you have new things to study. And so it definitely is something that's kind of ever changing, which I really like to think through.
Yeah, so is Gen Z the population that you're most interested in?
Yes, they are. I will say that I'm most interested in looking at emerging adults, like around ages 18 to 25.
Okay.
I think that adolescents, yes, are like, it's really important to think about them, but I think that the reason why I'm currently looking at emerging adults is because I think that at that time, it's really when it's a period in your life when you start having to mobilize yourself and having to think through solutions versus when you're in high school. Usually, you have a school counselor. There's not as much autonomy there as opposed to when you get to kind of college age and you're responsible for your own mental health. And you have to be responsible for your own mental health. You have to like think about what tools are helpful for you versus going to an adult and asking them what tools are helpful for you. And so I think that that period of independence is so important to think about. And it's important to think about how those folks are using technology because it really is kind of a gateway for them to figure themselves out as well and just kind of learn more about themselves. So, yeah.
I want to go deeper on that. And so you are through your research and your longer term vision, which I don't really know how long that is. You want to create applications or other forms of social media that will assist um, uh, next generation people uh, with their healthy lives. Is that what I hear you saying?
I'm not sure if I'd want to create necessarily, mainly because I don't see myself as an app developer. And although like those are really cool tools that I think would be great to have kind of under my belt, I'm not sure if like developing apps is like necessarily right up my alley. But I do think that like I'm mainly just like meeting them where they're at. So if they choose to stop using social media, which is highly unlikely, I'd like to just kind of follow them and see like, well, what do they choose to use instead? And then how can I study or like figure out what their reasoning is for that and how that's affecting their mental health. And I think that it's important, especially because there's not a lot of research on technology because it's so new and it changes so quickly. And so I think that my kind of long term goal is really just to be there with that audience and to see how they're changing their use of technology and then making sure that that information about technology also gets into their hands, which is why I think it's so important to work with communities. Um, and then I also am specifically interested in looking at diverse community research and thinking about how technology can expand access to mental health care in those spaces. And so as new technology comes up, I think I kind of just want to be there for that and make sure that I'm there for that community to see if that's something that's helpful for them.
Okay, so you want to be there next to them, meet them where they're at, which is what I just heard you say. You're not going to actually create the code, so to speak, for the application, but do you see your research being available to those people who create the code that could make it better, bigger, stronger?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think that's a really important part of technology research is industry partnerships. So making sure that you're communicating with industry partners and trying to do research with them as well. I've worked with a couple of folks. I've done some work with Sound Mind, which is a music therapy app. I've had a few conversations with some folks at Headspace, which is also a mindfulness meditation mental health app that's very widely available. Um, and I also work with community organizations that have a lot of stakeholders in technology spaces. Headspace is one of the stakeholders for an organization that I work with. I work with Asian Mental Health Collective as well. Um, and so, yeah, I do think that it's important to have those types of conversations. And that's something that I've learned a lot this year is that to do research and really do impactful research, there's so many different people that you have to talk to before and after that study kind of comes to fruition. So
Yeah.
that's something that's been really important to me as well.
Yeah. So, Justine, many members of our audience are what you might describe as emerging leaders. So they would fit that age category that you talked about, that you meet where they're at. So if they're out there and they're living in our world today, what would you say to them if they are uh, like most of us, you said, struggling with some sort of mental wellness, want to move more towards mental wellness? How would you guide them to seek support?
That is a tough one because I think there's just so many layers. The first thing that I would say, at least in line with my research, is that I know that technology gets a bad rep. Like I know that it has a lot of parts of it that are harmful. But I actually believe a lot in the power of technology, and I believe a lot in its potential, especially with expanding access to care. And I know, as someone that's also part of that age group, that there are a lot of ways that we use technology to connect with people. And I think that if something serves us, if something is helping us in our mental health, then I don't think that we should shut it down because we're told that
Yeah,
technology is bad for our mental health.
yeah,
So I definitely do think that, at least like in the context of my research, that is what I would say is to really listen to that intuition, but also to make sure that we're really checking in with ourselves and being really intentional about how we use technology and thinking about what else is out there outside of the toolbox that we've already built for ourselves.
right. That toolbox is so important, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And I'm curious. So if someone has a texting relationship going on, for connection, if someone uses, which everybody uses text today, so if someone is using text as a form of connection, do you think that that is takes the place of face-to-face connection, or based on your belief in technology as you've just described it, or can you not compare the two?
I don't think that that's the case. And to be honest, I don't think that that's actually been the case for a lot of folks in Gen Z. I don't think that technology has completely replaced their desire for human interaction. I actually think, especially during the pandemic, we saw the effects of isolation being exacerbated, really, and that longing for human connection is still there. And people text and have, like connections with people over text, but a lot of times those texts become in person interactions. Usually you text people and you plan something to do with them. And so, at least like from my experience and talking with a lot of folks in Gen Z, there's this idea or like this misconception that because they're so tapped into technology, they're missing out on talking to each other in person. But I just think that that's simply not the case. I think that they talk to them probably more often than they would if they were only seeing them face to face. But I think that that longing for seeing people is still there. That's an innate human thing. And I think that technology should never replace in human interaction. I don't think that it's doing that necessarily quite yet to this generation. And I think that it's important still to obviously check in with ourselves and make sure that we are having that in person interaction. Just like I think that technology is never a replacement for in person therapy, it's only like a supplemental thing. And I always think about that as a supplemental tool and never a replacement for anything like that.
Yeah. Okay, good. You shared your interest in mental health and what you're doing there with your research. And you've shared your interest in technology, and you also shared your interest and benefit from mentoring. Share with us uh, your the opportunities that you've had to be involved with things that embrace all three of those and initiatives that you're involved in.
Yes. So I I guess I can start with like the most recent thing, which was I was a part of the Mental Health Youth Action Forum at the White House, which was an incredible opportunity to be able to kind of intersect a lot of different pieces of my work. I got to talk about my personal work and meet a lot of people from industry perspectives and also like other advocates, and that was really valuable for me to meet all of those people and be able to have conversations with them. And so there was that piece.
So,
There
how
was
many people
also
were there? How many people were there?
there were 30 people there.
So, it was a small
Yes,
group.
it was a very small group of people, and so we really got to know each other, and I still talk to all those folks to this day.
Yeah.
I've gotten coffee with one of them a few times. I've hung out with multiple of them. I've been to another event in Los Angeles that they were at, or that a few of them were at, and so it's really nice to have that tight knit community that shares
Yeah.
that experience.
Yeah. So, go ahead. You were going to
Oh yeah.
share about the actual experience.
Yeah, so it definitely intersected my research interest and also the idea of like policy making, and thinking about how important it is to think about how policies affect our work. And this is true across like so many different fields. And so I talked to, in that space, I was able to talk to President Biden, Dr. Jill Biden, who was amazing throughout the entire thing. And I had like a personal conversation with her as well that was really awesome. Um, and Dr. Murthy, who is the US Surgeon General,
Hmm.
and I had conversations about increasing access to mental health care, and the importance of mentorship as well, which I talked to Dr. Biden about, like importance of mentoring college students. Um, and I think that that kind of was a moment for me, I would say, because I never thought about policymaking as being a really integral thing into my work. But I realized how important it was to communicate with folks that your work is going to be supported by funding. or that there are government programs that are going to be able to scale your work up, and increase the access to your work. So I think that that really opened a lot of doors for me in terms of
Yeah.
like talking with those folks. And I recently met with Congresswoman Katie Porter as well, and was able to talk with her here, and think about like potentially doing like town hall meetings and things where we can get out into the community. And so it really brought into like, or I guess it kind of provided me with a sort of perspective that was a lot wider than I had before.
Yeah. So, Justine, you really are a woman making news. And I have to ask, um, I would say meeting the president and meeting Dr. Jill Biden, the first lady, those are some pretty influential people. How, how, how did you get there?
Yeah, so I work with Asian Mental Health Collective, which is this amazing organization. It's a grassroots organization that works with Asian communities to increase access to mental health care and destigmatize mental health.
Hmm.
And that's a real big goal of mine in my research, is to think about how to increase access to mental health specifically in that community. And I think that technology has a lot of potential there to be a confidential and anonymous way for folks to get immediate help in a community that has really high mental health stigma. And so that's kind of where my work with them started. I just kind of reached out to them to ask about the work that they were doing, specifically when the Stop Asian Hate movement was happening, and was at really like the pinnacle.
Yeah.
And that was when I reached out to them more on like a personal level to think about how I could help. And then I ended up getting involved in their research division and started like leading some projects there. Um, and that was when they had kind of said like, "Hey, we have this thing that you could apply to. It is hosted by MTV and is an opportunity to go to the White House." And I thought like, "Oh, cool! That would be really interesting. Like a really interesting space to be able to." Talk about my ideas. I had no idea that the president was going to be there. I had no idea the first lady was going to be there. No idea Selena Gomez or Dr. Murphy was going to be there either. Um, I thought that it was just an event that was at the White House,
Yeah.
of folks that like were important, or like even like policymakers, like folks from like the House of Representatives or the Senate. And so I thought that it was kind of just an event like that.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that it was going to be that big of an event that was like
Yeah.
live streamed on the White House website and stuff. So I definitely think that like I was in for a surprise, but was definitely lucky to have been selected for that. So yeah.
Oh yeah, well, I don't know that I would use the word luck. I can definitely have spent about 20 minutes with you. I understand why anybody would want to select you to be a part of that group, and
Oh,
congratulations
thank
on that.
you, thank you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So if there was one thing that you took away from that particular forum and meeting, what was it?
I think it's just the idea that our work expands so far outside of how much we think it does.
Mm,
To be able to create impactful work, it really is about involving multiple stakeholders and thinking about like communities and how communities will be impacted. Talking to advocates that are actually on the ground there and how they think your work should be informed by their perspectives.
yeah,
Policy making, like I mentioned before. And so it really is, our work is not as small as we think it is if we reach the right people, especially. And so I think that that really kind of expanded my idea of what research is. And thinking about how research isn't just like this small thing that we do in a lab and then like we put it out and then no one reads it. Like that can't just be it. There has to be more than that. And so I think that that was especially something that became really important to me, especially after that event, was really just making sure that I'm talking to the people that I have to talk to be able to make sure that there are people that actually benefit from my research and it doesn't just stay in a journal and like rot there for years.
well, I'm going to check back with you sometime in the future so that you can tell me how you've continued to rock it and move it through. So, how much longer do you have in working with your PhD? When will you be a PhD?
So my normative time would be around 3 years from now. That'd be around, hopefully, fingers crossed, I finish my dissertation. Um, so that should be around the time that I finish. I've been told that I could finish in my 4th year, but I'm kind of just taking it slow because I'm also doing so many other things, trying to do community work at the same time. So I'm hoping that 2025 is the year.
Okay, 2025. That's great. And, Justine, you have shared so much. I'm so inspired by you and the work that you're doing. And it's not the first time in past conversations as we prepared for this broadcast. Your interests, which aren't just one, but are multiple, and yet they all connect. There's an interrelatedness, interconnectedness to them, and you're moving them all together. If there was a message that you wanted to leave with our audience after spending time with you today, what would that message be?
Yeah, I mean, it would be definitely that. First of all, that mental health care is not a one size fits all approach. There are multiple different ways that you can help yourself and multiple different tools where you can access anonymous and confidential care. So that's always at the forefront of everything that I do. But at the same time, on a personal level, it's also that you, and it sounds so cliche, but like you really can do like what you set your mind to if you believe in yourself. And I know that it sounds so cheesy, but it's so true. And I think that the one of the most important parts of me being in that space was making sure that people knew that there was space for us in positions of power, and that those spaces are not just reserved for folks that may be wealthier, like, or white upper class. I think that those spaces are open for us if we make ourselves open to them as well. And obviously thinking about, like, the opportunities that are out there for folks that look like me, for folks that may come from like Asian backgrounds where mental health isn't discussed as much, that there those discussions are happening, and it's more about just like getting out there and really being involved in them. And so yeah.
That's great. And Justine, Women Making News is going to make a donation to an organization that you have been involved with since its inception. Again, you are a Woman Making News. And could you just tell our audience a bit about the other nonprofit that you're involved in, and name it and a little bit about what it does?
Yes, absolutely. Also wanted to say thank you so much for your donation as well. It's really helpful, especially for smaller organizations like this one. And I think that, um, donations go so far with these types of organizations that are small, that are grassroots. And so the reason why I chose this especially was because it was founded by two women, particularly two Black women that are really passionate about making sure that the next generation of leaders has the tools that it needs to be able to be compassionate and embrace diversity. Um, and that's something that I think is especially really impactful because, especially with smaller organizations like them, it's so inspiring to see that there are women that are making these types of moves and starting these types of movements. And I think that I believe a lot in their mission. I think that they really encourage young people to embrace human differences, and they provide them with a lot of resources and a lot of tools, webinars, and classes to be able to think through how children can kind of open up their minds, and develop their own personal identity as well. And so when we start with the young folks, like, the impact is so wide there. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm really excited about this, and also really excited to report back to you about how that donation has helped them.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for that. That was beautiful. And again, Justine, thank you for being with us today. I'm so appreciative of you and your work. And I hope that we will stay connected and that you'll stay connected with Women Making News.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much as well for hosting. It's such an amazing podcast that gives folks the platform to be able to talk about these types of things.
Okay, see you soon.
Thank you. Bye.
You heard from Justine Bautista, and you also heard of our donation to the nonprofit organization that she is working with. I would encourage you to think about sponsoring or donating to Women Making News so we can continue that kind of work with and for women. And want to encourage you to join us in September when our broadcast will be a little bit different than it has been in the past. We will have 3 board members from Sterling, Seacrest, Pritchett, and they will be joining us to talk about their journey to the boardroom. Thank you for being with us today. Have a good afternoon.